Greetings and welcome to this bonus episode of the Wolfie Pod. As it's the 30th anniversary of Ghostwatch, we wanted to celebrate this milestone with 2 episodes based on this monumental TV programme. This is the first of those episodes, and I was lucky enough to chat with Rich Lawden, the director and producer of Behind the Curtains, a Ghostwatch documentary he created in 2012. We originally planned to include this in our main Ghostwatch episode, but because Rich is such a top man, we ended up with just over 2 hours of conversation, so even with editing that down, we had way too much to include it in that episode. In this conversation, you will hear how Rich first experienced Ghostwatch and how it's fascinated him to this day, how he got the gig to create the documentary, and how starstruck he was meeting Craig Charles while he was filming Red Dwarf. A word of warning though, that we were visited by pipes during recording as we had some audio issues, but he didn't win as it didn't impact the interview too much. So I hope you're sitting comfortably, as here we go. Delighted to welcome to the Wolfie Pod Rich Lawden. So welcome, mate, to the Wolfie Pod. Great to have you here.
Oh, it's a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on.
I guess I just want to start off with just letting the listeners know a little bit about yourself and your history.
Sure. Well, I mean, as far as Ghostwatch is concerned, I was part of the 11.07 million. I think it was 11.07 million crowd who watched it on the night, October 31st, 1992. I was 7 years old. I had my dad to the left of me and my mother to the right, and I've recounted the story very many times, but before the program even started, my dad was trying to I describe it as stripping the engine. He was adamant that he was going to prove that this thing wasn't real by pointing out the various inconsistencies with camera movement, or even down to the presentation of the program, which was very carefully worded, changed an awful lot just prior to broadcast. So that was Mark Waddington, who was the voice of BBC One in the early 90s. Beautiful received pronunciation voice. And as I say, presentation had crafted this very carefully worded intro to Ghostwatch. It was arguably considerably longer. It certainly felt longer than a typical conventional intro. But they basically said that it was a drama and that there were actors and so forth. And Dad, sure enough, there you go, starring, written by, all of that. And he was very interested in working out how it was being made. So that was the one viewpoint that I had to the left of me. To the right of me, my mother, who, even though she now says to me that I've ruined Emmerdale for her because she's looking out for Boom Shadow and various things like that, things that she just absolutely wouldn't have been interested in at all if it hadn't been for me, yabbering. She came from a completely different perspective. She somehow, telepathically, I don't know how she worked it out, but she was able to deduce which parts of Ghostwatch were impromptu and which were scripted. Is that person an actor? Is that person somebody just walking past? She was able to figure all this stuff out. And of course, I'm this 7-year-old in between it. So I was always very interested in film theory from a very young age. I remember doing a shot count on Alien 3, for which, because I was so cool, I did a shot count on Alien 3 for how often Sigourney Weaver was wearing a bald cap or being actually shorn-haired. I don't know why I did it, but I was interested in it. But having explained both of my parents' perceptions of Ghostwatch, maybe you'll understand. But I think we were captivated by it. I certainly was. The story really carried us along. We really thought that this was something different. It was engaging. It was curious. It was fun in that sense that you could focus on any different aspects of it as you chose. You could focus on the narrative, you could focus on the acting, you could focus on the direction, you could focus on the staging, the cameras, the lighting, all of these different aspects. And of course, Pipes as well. You could try and keep an eye out for him if on the night, without any forewarning, you caught a couple of glimpses. And I do remember my dad saying, "Did you see him in the curtain? Did you see him in the curtain?" No. So then you have to pay attention throughout the rest of the film. So, it's constantly making you think. And I remember that night sleeping very soundly. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was probably a bit past my bedtime, but it was Halloween. It was a Saturday, as I recall. It wasn't until maybe a week or two later that I started, I think it would be fair to say, obsessing about it, there was an absolute dearth of material pertaining to Ghostwatch, so they've yet to repeat it. The BBC have yet to repeat it in full. It has appeared piecemeal on various programs and on various channels, including CBBC, which is the most extraordinary thing ever. It's always on programs like The One Show or, very rarely on like The Culture Show or anything like that. It does happen occasionally, but typically it's on like 12 Again Spooky Special on CBBC, and they'll put scary bits in, I mean, people could talk about Ghostwatch and whether or not it was banned. It's easy to describe Ghostwatch in terms of it being banned, in as much as nobody talked about it hardly. I think there was a little bit on the news here and there, but I can't recall. There was very little in magazine, newspaper. There was no internet as we know it in those days. So, I always say before a screening that if you didn't see Ghostwatch in '92, you don't remember what '92 was like off the top of your head, or if you weren't even born, you have to kind of imagine just how disconnected you were from anybody else, even those closest to you, in either reassuring you regarding what you were watching or trying to understand or appreciate what it is that you were watching. If you wanted to do that, your choices were landline, pager, postcard, or carrier pigeon. That's it. That's the only way that you could phone a friend or get in touch with somebody and say, are you watching BBC One right now? So bearing in mind, the only thing that existed of Ghostwatch in almost its entire audience was that in the imagination. Of course, your imagination tailor fits anything to suit your, as somebody said, prejudices and proximities. So for me, I still have the occasional Ghostwatch nightmare. It does happen. And by the time we actually videoed it the night it went out, my old man used to video quite a lot. It was on the TV, it's a great archive now, but it took quite a while for me to even watch that video cassette. And I remember watching it with my grandmother, and she fell asleep about 10, 15 minutes in during a particularly scary part. And that was the moment that I thought, right, this thing doesn't have to be shackled to my fear. I don't have to be terrified of it necessarily. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. Certainly, I can look at it from a different angle. And if ever the opportunity arose at school, certainly at college, I would try and incorporate it into coursework and what have you. And around that time, 2002, the BFI released it on DVD. And you and I have spoken about this briefly, Jason. But that DVD, the original BFI release, was just, I'm doing the chef's kiss motion, It was just brilliant. The menus were beautifully crafted, very, very scary, very evocative, genius as well from an editing perspective. It was literally a still frame of one of the locked-off cameras, different locked-off camera shots, and then they just added some film grain to it and some sound effects, and that's all you need. And that was a brilliant Christmas present, a great audio commentary and mini doc and all the rest of it. But it just felt slightly incomplete to me. There was a mini documentary on it that I don't think is longer than 10 minutes, possibly much shorter. So when the opportunity arose for me to pitch a feature-length retrospective documentary concerning Ghostwatch, then I leapt at it.
How did that come about, the opportunity to give that pitch?
Well, I kind of, it was almost happen chance. I think what happened, as I recall, was I was trying to make it as a screenwriter, and I got as far in screenwriting in 2007 as I have in 2022. It's very difficult. The thing with the appeal of screenwriting to me is that it's supposed to be a very rigid format. Every screenplay is supposed to look the same. So as long as you get that format right, then everything else theoretically should fall into place. You can tell whatever story you want, but you've got that foundation already laid up. The difficulty for me, I think, was that I would write something, send it off to an agent, and then the agent would write back, which is your first step on the ladder. The first step on the ladder is a polite rejection. When they ignore you or just are not interested, if they write back and say, this bit's good, but I don't like the rest of it, then your foot's in the door almost, and that's your opportunity to prove yourself. Unfortunately, what happened, I remember the last note that I got back was, we really like the comedy in this. And it certainly wasn't a comedy. And it's not that they'd misread it. There were humorous things in it, but they were, in my view, they were humorous because of the dramatic stuff that surrounded them. So it was a bit like letting the air out of the balloon as opposed to letting it pop. You know, it was, something was working, but something wasn't. So I thought, right, drop the ego. You're doing something right, but you're doing most of it wrong. That's cool. I did a web search for screenwriting workshops in the UK, and I think I was able to specify within the next couple of weeks. And the first one that came up was Stephen Volk at the Watershed in Bristol Media Centre, which I'd never been to. And I remember staring at the screen for about 10 seconds going, Stephen Volk wrote Ghostwatch. And it said Q&A, and I thought, right, not only am I likely to learn a great deal from this guy's lecture or whatever interview, whatever he's going to be doing on stage, there's an opportunity to ask him a question here. And this only came to me. I misremembered this very slightly, but I remember now distinctly asking myself, what would be a good question to ask Stephen Volk in his Q&A? And my question was going to be, why hasn't anybody made a documentary about Ghostwatch? Because I thought he would get then instantly that I wanted to learn more. And then everything just fell into place. I could make a documentary. I mean, it was incredibly naive, but I thought that's what I want to do. I want to get into filmmaking. You know, I don't care if it's screenwriting or any aspects of it. As long as I'm in that world doing something that I can do, then I'm going to be happy. So because I trained myself up on the formatting and what have you, I was able to rattle off, I don't know, anywhere between 2 and 4 pages of a treatment for stuff that I wanted to see in a Ghostwatch documentary. It was for about 4 seconds called Ghostwatch Behind the Scenes. And then I thought, no, behind the curtains, obviously. It ended up actually being one of the chapter markings in the BFI DVD as well, and they got there first. I have to hold my hands up to that, but it wasn't intentional. So there's a nice bit of continuity there in a roundabout way. But I went down to Bristol. Lots of strange things happened that day. Got off the train, got a taxi because I didn't know where I was going. Stepped out of the taxi, approached Waterside. The first person that I bumped into was Steve Volk. And then during his Q&A, my watch stopped, I remember. The projector froze. They were showing brief clips from stuff that he'd done. I think one was called The Deadness of Dad. There was some stuff from Ghostwatch and some features. And a lady burst into tears in front of me watching some of the footage. And then the footage stopped, just, you know, really disconcerting, almost like in Ghostwatch, like some technical problem. And then I ended up missing the last train back. So it was at that point that I just thought, right, I'm going to join the queue of people that want to talk to him. And I was being awfully polite, not pushing my way in. And then this lovely lady in spectacles just got about 3 inches from my face and said, do you want to speak to him as well? And it was Steve's wife. And I think she just about had enough. You probably have to ask her, but it was a long night. And I said, yes, please. And she just parted the crowd, all for me, and said, Steve, this young man needs to speak to you, and then we need to go. And he said, okay. He was, I remember shakily handing him this treatment and saying, I'm so sorry, but can you just read? I'm sorry for overstepping the mark, but just read it and let me know. And he I think it's fair to say that he was terribly impressed, and I was very grateful for that. And there was, you could probably work out when it was, because it was the tail end of a postal strike. By the time I got home, about a week later or so, there's a big thud on my doorstep, and went over and picked it up, and there's this big padded envelope, and I didn't tend to get an awful lot of post, and I ripped it open, and it was the script for Ghostwatch, signed by Steve, with a cover letter saying, thank you so much. I'll do my best to introduce you to whoever you need to speak to. And I think the first person I spoke to was Leslie Manning, the director. That was pretty early in the day, you know, like that was late 2007. By January or so of 2008, I was pitching at BBC4, which was really, and that was informal as well, I must stress. But I remember a meeting was set up, through well, I don't know, mutual friend, is that the right way of saying it? But somebody who had a great amount of time for the idea was able to set up this project. I spoke to a lovely executive at BBC4 who was very keen to make it, but for one reason or another, it ended up not happening there. I think it was a bit of a waiting game. You've got to wait until the kind of tides are right. You know, it's almost like you want to surf the crest of that wave. You've got to really be patient until the time's right. And I knew in my heart that if I didn't make this documentary now, number one, it was likely not to be made at all. And two, it certainly wasn't going to be made the way I wanted it to be made, because the BBC have their own processes and their own language and their own flavour and everything. So I just thought, I think I'm going to do it myself. I remember going to a Ghostwatch screening. Leslie was there. She asked me how I was getting on. I basically said, I think I'd want to make it myself. You know, do you want to be involved? And I think she was keen to be part of it. And I said, let's just do it ourselves. You know, like we'll have the freedom to talk about what we want. We're not going to have to worry about, you know, censorship potentially. Not that that was ever on the cards, but it's just, you know, when it's other people's money, then you have to respect that. And I just thought, let's just do it. And I have to be perfectly honest. I don't mean to tear open old wounds for anybody, not even that old. But we very sadly lost Mike Smith and Richard Brooke, executive producer of Ghostwatch, very soon after they were interviewed. So, you know, I don't mean anything other than to say respectfully, I'm glad that I made it when I did, because you know, it wouldn't have happened.
As you say, it's great to have their stories on
Yeah.
video.
It is. They were very keen as well. I mean, this is there's two surprises really that came during the making of the documentary for me off the top of my head. Number one, there's a guy called Stephen Freestone who ended up becoming a friend of mine, and he ran the first Ghostwatch fan site, which was ghostwatch.info, now defunct, so don't try to go to ghostwatch.info, it's not there anymore. I seem to recall that one or two people had actually from Ghostwatch had gravitated towards that site as well, because there were so many unanswered questions and the cast and the crew really wanted to have their voices heard. And number one, everybody who I thought was going to be busy for Ghostwatch ended up available, and everybody I thought was going to be available ended up being busy. And that other aspect was that I really thought it was going to be difficult to get those people on camera, and it really wasn't. It really wasn't. Their schedules aside, they were happy to talk about Ghostwatch. They were happy to talk about any capacity whatsoever. I didn't have to do any prompting. I remember I had a clipboard, 2 pages full of notes, and typically what would happen, because Leslie was with me and she was there during the production of Ghostwatch, I would just be about to ask some ridiculous question like, how did you become an actor or something? And then she would launch in with, do you remember on like that Thursday at 2:30 when so-and-so came in? Can we talk about that? And like, as a fan, I'm just sat there going, oh, wow, you know, but they knew exactly what they wanted to talk about. And I'm so glad that I was able to give everybody a platform for their voice. But what they brought to the doc was just invaluable, and in so many different respects. I think it helped that obviously it is the bulk of the documentary is talking heads for the most part, but I really think that it's helped change the perception of Ghostwatch from this, as I say, something that was shackled to fear and confusion. And has it been buried? Has it, you know, why is it in the grade 1 vault? All of these rumors and all the rest of it. It's gone from that, and not ignoring that part of its history, which is, it's as valid as any other aspect to Ghostwatch, but it's just shine a different light on it, you know, and people can say, oh, actually, I really enjoyed Ghostwatch. It was really, I remember Halloween. Yeah, that was cool. You know, when's the doc coming out? It always seems to end with that question. But yeah, oh, what a journey.
Yeah, because I guess because of how people reacted to Ghostwatch when it was first aired, and it became this kind of thing that people shouldn't see again, and it getting banned from TV up until this day, really, like you say, in full. So I guess everyone that was involved in the programme never really had the opportunity to tell their stories or to tell their experiences with the show. The fact that they had that opportunity through your documentary is wonderful.
Yeah, I think so. And it's interesting that the word banned is bandied about as far as Ghostwatch is concerned. And even I've used it in the past. And it's what is curious to me is that I know for a fact, because I saw somebody bring it up on it. Well, first of all, there's two aspects to something being banned. I've seen a BBC archival terminal bring up Ghostwatch, and apparently, I don't know if it's true or not, I wouldn't be surprised, but there are mechanisms in place at the BBC that if you are considering broadcasting something and it's contentious in any way, and that could be for any number of reasons. It's not just that it's too scary or this. I mean, there are legal implications, like maybe there's a police investigation, something along those lines. Those programs are rightly categorized, and so you have to, if you want to broadcast that, then it either has to go through different mechanisms, or it has to be cleared or whatever. You would expect Ghostwatch to be in that category, or a category like that. It isn't. I don't think there's anything really stopping Ghostwatch being broadcast again. Off the top of my head, it's a curious thing that it hasn't been repeated since, and it's a curious thing that the initial reaction to Ghostwatch seemed to follow a pattern that, in my view, wasn't constructive. It was all heads must roll at the BBC, and shouldn't have done this, shouldn't have said that. It wasn't past the watershed far enough, and all of this stuff. And it's so remarkable to me that is the thing that is. It's like he who shouts loudest is heard first, or whatever the expression is. Like everybody else was either indifferent and they considered it to be just another program. They were like, yeah, it's fine, whatever. Let's see what else is on. But then you've got your fans, but the fans never had an opportunity to really have their voices heard. And one of the surprises for me making a documentary was Sarah Green discussing there was a possibility of having a kind of Ghostwatch debate program actually follow the broadcast, because there had been a live phone in and what have you. And I think that could have been fascinating. And I actually think that's long overdue. I think that should still happen. I don't think there's any reason why the BBC couldn't do that, even online. But the more voices heard about Ghostwatch, I think the better.
Yeah, because it is a shame that the program has been tagged with this a little bit, because even doing the research for our podcast and watching it more with adult eyes, really appreciate what they did with the program and how they introduced certain aspects that would become important later on in the story, and the way that it was all just portrayed and acted, and the more behind the scenes and that kind of aspect. It's a shame that wasn't more celebrated, because Stephen and Leslie and the rest of the crew and the cast really pulled off a magical thing, really.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing with Ghostwatch is that at the end of the day, it's a bloody good drama. It's a really, really good drama. The only difference between it and any other drama is presentation. You would take your time in a drama. You would have, you might have a page of exposition, stage direction, where you have a character, take a drawer of a cigarette, look around pensively. What's that over there? He walks over. This can go on for minutes and minutes. Or you can get Craig Charles, give him a microphone and have him stick it in someone's face and say, what happened on Thursday? And very realistically and plausibly, that person will say, oh, well, I was standing over here, and then I looked through a window and I saw a ghost, and then the family came running out of the house, and then I went and made him a cup of tea. And you can get all of that out really quickly and not compromise the dramatic bullseye, if you like, what you're aiming for. So this is the thing. The perception of Ghostwatch, to me, is fascinating, because actually under the skin, it's a really conventional, everyday drama. It's a 3-act structure. One of the things that's very different about Ghostwatch, and it's something that I very rarely get on a soapbox about, but I think it's probably worth mentioning, and that it is very female driven. It's very female led. And Sarah is a kind of Sigourney Weaver, Ripley type character, looking after her crew, and she goes back for the kid. Any Alien fans out there will know what that is. That veneer, if you like, which Sarah herself has described as acting. Sarah delivering a ghost story to camera. Well, guess what? She doesn't need to read what Steve Volt wrote, because with respect, she approached him and said, "Would you mind if I told a real ghost story of my own? Because I can do this. I do it. I'm going live. I talk to the camera and I paint a picture of what's happening." And of course, he said yes. In the same way that, in the instant panic of Mike Smith asking if he can be a part of it because he loved the script so much. Yes, of course you can. That's brilliant. That will make it more. It will more heft to it. It will make it more. And it's always when you are constantly building on an established structure. You know what the story is. You know who the good guys are and the bad guys are, and you know what the stakes are, and you know how you want that audience to react. When you are that flexible still, that you can, I tell somebody else's story, but H.R. Giger, who made the Alien, made a big model of the thing, a maquette that nobody had seen in 78, 79, invited everybody in, and people are going white and, oh, wow, give me that glass of cognac. I don't know if it's a true story, but I love it. One of the producers had the temerity of saying, well, it's an alien. Why doesn't it have 6 fingers instead of 5? Because that'll make it more alien. And there's like a deathly silence, because he's speaking to a fine artist, somebody who's world renowned. And rather than be prissy or difficult, he just says, yeah, fine, I can do that as well. It's that when that is the working environment, that's when the magic happens, because the ego drops, and all you're interested in is making the piece as good as it can be.
You mentioned about some of the cast and the crew that you featured in the documentary. It sounded like you had great experiences with them all. But was there like one particular person that you was like more excited to talk with?
They were all lovely. I have to say that in their own rights, they were all lovely. Sarah and Mike were very collaborative, creative. They had a little studio almost set up in their main offices. We interviewed them at Denham Aerodrome, I think, or it was wherever they were based at the time. And I look through this wall of windows into the hangar bay where Mike had a helicopter. And it was, would you mind if I shoot down there with your helicopter? And he's like, yeah, sure. So that sort of thing happened invariably. Gillian, who played Dr. Pascoe, was, I think, rehearsing for a play at Menier Chocolate Theatre. I might be misremembering, but that was a beautiful space. Andy Nyman also was backstage at a theatre, and we were able to, lovely locations. I think the one that I was looking forward to the most, purely for the fact that I'm such a massive fan of Red Dwarf, was Craig. I bumped into Craig a number of times over the years, and at his best, Craig will make you feel like $1 million. He really, when everything's sort of when there's a good foundation and everything's cool, he's just the nicest, loveliest bloke. And because those events can get pretty hectic, like, okay, we need you on the stage in 5 minutes, and we need, but he'll take time with you. And there was a slight possibility that we could have recorded on the set of one of the Red Dwarfs, which would have been amazing, but I think they were so busy. But I remember he said, I've got a room for you, so you go and set up. As soon as I'm on my dinner break, I'll come up and join you." And we were like, okay, great. And the only place for me was behind the door. When the door opened, it was just the way I was positioned. So this door gets kicked in, and in walks Lister in the leather jacket and the leather trousers with the dreadlocks, holding his little styrofoam something or other from the catering truck. And I was just like, oh wow, this is, I just couldn't believe it. It's so crazy. And then he was just lovely. So yeah, as far as moments go, almost meeting Dave Lister was remarkable. But it depends which. It depends, really, in answering that question, as regard what I was hoping to glean on the day. Because, as I say, like you can have an hour's filming with Craig Charles, and he's going to make you laugh. He's going to tell a funny story. He's going to reminisce. He's going to, but then he will start to wax lyrical on horror films, and you go, hang on a minute, because I know that Craig's a science fiction fan, but again, very clued up in terms of how movies and TV are constructed. So he starts dropping these pearls of wisdom. I'm like, wow, and then likewise, you meet Richard Bruck, who took time out of treatment. He was actually in hospital when we recorded him. He was being treated. And he said, yeah, just do it in the car park, And then he comes out, and that's a completely different type of excitement, because not only is he bringing his enthusiasm to it, but he's also explaining machinations at the BBC, things that you would never be party to unless somebody wrote a memoir or something. I seem to recall Richard was actually, he may have wanted to write a memoir. Actually, I might be misremembering, but I would have loved. It's such a shame that Richard died. He was such a good friend of the project, and fast becoming a mentor to me. I've never known anybody write a ream of, well, I don't know if emails come in reams, but he wrote something like 4 or 5 pages for me in 10 minutes, and it was just beautiful. It was virtually copperplate. It was perfect grammar. He was making good points. So everybody brought something to the table. But yeah, as far as Red Dwarf goes, it has to be Craig.
Yeah, I think I would have lost my mind if that was me, because being a big Red Dwarf fan myself, to be in that situation, yeah, I think I might have just actually lost the plot completely. Sorry, Dave. I mean, Craig. I'm gonna have to just take a moment. Exactly.
There was a weird thing that actually happened on that, because I remember I wanted to get a photo of us, and it's up, right? It's up somewhere. It's up on the blog or somewhere. And I remember before I could ask him for the photo, he'd already gone back into his dress, because he was on a tight schedule. He'd already gone back into the dressing room and put his leathers back on, and he come out, and I said, "Oh, Craig, can we get a photo for that?" And he went, well, he called me something, but in jest, let's put it that way. And I said, "Look, do you mind?" He said, "No, of course, I'm kidding." He said, "But I need your coat." So he took his leather off, and he put my Melton on, and then one of the crew took a photo of the 4 of us. And unbeknownst to me, and I could have been really naughty about this, but I was very, very keen to protect the secrecy of the program. Unbeknownst to any of us, hanging on the door behind was a costume that hadn't been announced for one of those episodes of Red Dwarf that he was due to wear. I think it was for Trojan, the first episode of Series 10. So he was in a kind of like a Star Trek garb, and I didn't want to wreck the joke for anyone. So I remember spending hours airbrushing out this costume. And then going, no, that's too soft. Need a harder edge and everything. And it was, and nobody remarked upon the photo looking odd. So I must have done a good job. All roads lead back to Craig Charles on Ghostwatch in one way or the other. I remember as a 7-year-old, we didn't know he was in Ghostwatch, but when Craig appeared, I was just elated, absolutely elated. He was just such a hero of mine growing up.
He played his part well. He just played Craig Charles, and that was excellent.
Do you know what's really interesting about that, Jason, as well? My favourite line in all of Ghostwatch is a line of Craig's, and it's towards the end of the programme, maybe 4/5, something like that, 6/7, I don't know, quite close towards the end. He is caught off guard. I think there's a screech in the house. The image cuts to black. I think maybe the title card comes up. Normal transmission will be resumed. And then it cuts to Craig standing beside the big scanner truck with Alan Demescu, the electronics engineer. And he tries to fill because he doesn't know what to say. And at some point he thinks he's off again. And he says, "I wish someone would have said we were on then. Here I am chatting away." And then he goes, "Only the BBC loves." And then turns away. Right now, here's an interesting thing: if you read the script for Ghostwatch, You would think that Ghostwatch was written for Craig. I think it was my feeling that it might have been. I'm almost certain that it wasn't, but it might as well have been because he played it so perfectly. It's so perfectly, I get angry thinking about it. But what has this program done to me? But if you read the script, I think Craig is called interviewer. I think Sarah's reporter, Craig is interviewer. And interviewer doesn't read like Craig at all. Some of it lends itself to Craig's timbre or the way he delivers things, certainly. But that line, in my view, is dead straight, and it's a kind of lovey line, you know. So I can well imagine. I couldn't possibly name who I could see in that role, but it would be somebody actually exasperating. Oh, only at the BBC, loves, you know, like a real lovey actor, thesp type, you know. Now you give that line to Craig, he's not going to say it like that. He's going to say it. He's going to put his own spin on it. He's going to make it ironic, and he's going to make it more plausible. And that is why that line is my favourite in Ghostwatch, because it seems to encapsulate the mentality of the craft, basically.
You couldn't get the opportunity to explore the house for the documentary, but you did eventually, which is on your YouTube channel. What was that like for you as a fan?
Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. We knocked on the door of that house. I think we might have even dropped a letter off while we were filming, because I wanted that to be part. There were lots of the documentary as it is, I'm terribly proud of, but it's very different to what I envisaged. I saw something a bit more dramatic, I think, and then that kind of stuff would have come later anyway. And when we looked, I mean, Leslie did this. She edited the whole thing, and I looked at it, and we were just so happy with it that we didn't need any dramatic stuff. But I think one of the things that I was playing with was that I wanted to shoot at the house that would be interspersed throughout the whole documentary. The family who lived there are absolutely lovely. I don't think they believed us. I think that, as I recall, they were like, what, our house in a film? No, they've got the wrong place. Funnily enough, somebody has actually visited us and told us the whole story, and we're quite keen to learn more. And I think a fan had tracked them down. Terrible with names. I think his name is Steve. His name is the photograph that was taken of him by the house is in Return to Foxhill. He very kindly let us put that in, and I'm very grateful that he did make that trip, because I do think that it allowed us to inquire one more time. But a couple of things struck me about going into the house. Number one, it's much smaller than it looks in Ghostwatch. Much smaller, which is curious because Ghostwatch is, as we say in TV land, 4:3. It's not widescreen. It's boxed in. If you watch it on a widescreen TV, it's going to have big pillar boxes to the left and right. So that should give a sort of claustrophobic, compressed image. But actually, if anything, it opens it up. It's a very small place, room to room, compared to what I thought it was going to be. And, there are some rooms that weren't even used in Ghostwatch. I think one of the rooms upstairs was used as a kind of, not a green room as such, but a kind of technical room where camera kit and stuff was stored. Obviously, it was vacant at the time of filming in 1992. But yeah, I remember an absolute terror, the like of which, thankfully, I haven't experienced since, when we saw the door to the glory hole. I mean, the word glory hole, as I recall, came from Steve Volk, maybe his wife. Somebody in their household referred to the loft, I think, or somewhere. It's like an old expression for where you keep your trinkets, your bits of your suitcases and your what have you. That's the glory hole. So, it's taken on a brand new meaning in the 21st century. But I do remember Leslie was filming. I was holding this microphone, and she just went, well, go on, get in. And I remember thinking to myself in that split second, oh my God, this whole thing of her helping me make this documentary, it's like a snuff film. They're gonna lock me in, they're gonna barricade it, and I'm gonna hear the coffin nails like all the way down, and I'll never get out of this. I don't ask me why. It's total paranoia. And I was mortified. It was genuinely terribly upsetting. Number one, it was quite a small space with a window behind it. Of course, you don't see in Ghostwatch. They probably blacked it. I mean, it wasn't the stuff in the house, even though it looks like it was filmed at night, it was actually filmed in the day, and they just blacked out the windows because there are certain regulations. I mean, any Ghostwatch fan worth their salt will know that there's demarcation of the BBC where if you make a documentary with a, well, not a documentary, oh, how dare I, if you make a drama if you make a drama like Ghostwatch, they have the option of going OB or studio. And outside broadcast, the OB unit just they weren't as well versed in dramatic language, I think. I don't mean to be disrespectful if that's not the case, but that's why they decided to go with studio, which meant that all of the OB stuff in Ghostwatch, all of the big scanner truck and all of the cameras, and that's a lie, not all the cameras, but all of the feeds and what have you in the scanner trucks, the monitor screens and whatever, had to be fake. It couldn't be legitimate, for the most part, because they were all props. Otherwise, you'd have to have an OB unit. But what they did was they put, I forget what they called. They're called like flats or blacks or flat blacks or something along those lines, where they put these big heavy cards in front of windows and then draw the curtains. And for all intents and purposes, it appears as though you're filming at night. So I'm sure they did that on the back of the glory hole entrance or whatever it was. But it's actually quite tall. So the door is short, but you could virtually stand up. It's the strangest thing. But I think the family that moved in, because they remodeled the place. I mean, it's just, they brought it up to such a beautiful standard. I think they might have thrown the original glory hole door in the skip. Had they have known when they moved in, that would have been pride of place on my wall. I don't know if it's possible to frame a door and hang it on the wall. Well, I'm sure it is, but I don't know how you're going to get a pane of glass in front of it. No, it was remarkable. It was a real honour. It was lovely to walk around in, just to be able to do that. But it was utterly surreal. I know Ghostwatch very, very well. I know it virtually beat for beat. It was just odd because obviously there's a lot of handheld camera in Ghostwatch. So I'm actually retracing the steps of Chris Miller, Mike Hayden, Sarah Green, the rest of the cast, certainly the crew element that was in the house. I was literally following their footsteps. So yeah, it was a great honour, if not intermittently petrifying.
Yeah, because I think one of the things I took away from watching that video on the YouTube was your face, like just the glee. You could see how happy you were to
Yes.
be there, even though you was terrified.
I really was. I as I say, it's one thing to be invited into somebody's home, but for them to be that welcoming, that puts you in such a happy place. You haven't even started yet. And then, I love filming. I really love. I don't nearly get the opportunity to do it for various reasons these days. It's quite a rarity for me. I loved being there, recording the stuff. I knew that it was worthwhile. I knew that people would get a kick out of it. And yeah, I'm glad that people were able to experience it kind of by proxy.
I will slam the BBC though in some ways for not putting a plaque on that house and saying,
I was thinking of doing. You can get them on eBay.
Can you?
And I just thought this is probably the best or worst idea ever. But who knows if the family are listening? Maybe we can get one made up. But
Sure.
yeah, why not?
Yeah, because if they had put a plaque on the wall at the time of filming, then maybe that door may not have ended up in a skip.
Exactly. That's the way I remember it, by the way. My memory is so bad. I just remember seeing various things. I'm sure Narayan, who it's his house, sent me a couple of photos. They took some photos before they did the remodel or the decoration, the redecoration. And I seem to recall there were little bits that had been like cupboard doors and what have you. So I can only imagine that they ended up on the skip. I'm 99% sure of that. But you never know. Like one day it might be or his kids might be on Antiques Roadshow with this plank of wood, and it's like, oh, look what was down the back of the sofa all these years. We thought we got rid of this.
Go back to the documentary. I was just intrigued on if you did come up against any issues or problems when making the documentary that kind of hindered you at all.
Not really. Money was always an issue. We were extremely tight budget. Schedule was an issue. My lofty idea. I remember when Leslie and we had a coffee somewhere to hammer out the deal between us to form a production company and to do everything above board. I remember saying to her, she was like, well, hey, look, this is how much money we've got. It's going to cost you this much per day. And I said, that's cool, because we're going to be finished in 2 weeks. And she was like, oh, okay, great. Because I had made inroads with various members of the cast and crew, and they were all happy to do it. But as I say, schedule, that's the last thing that I expected, was to knock on Craig's door, and say, do you want to do an interview for the documentary? Oh yeah, sure. But first I've got DJing, new series of Red Dwarf. Corey, at that point, he might have been doing a game show. You wouldn't believe how busy these people are on a day to day. They tend to have their own businesses and things like that, so it's not always easy to pin them down, and sometimes you just have to sort of hold your breath. And in fact, Craig couldn't do the first interview block. I seem to recall he was really under the weather, and we got a message like at the 11th hour saying, doctor's orders, can we reschedule? So that happened, and then you've already got the crew. We tried to do 3 interviews a day, and we more or less did that. And I wouldn't recommend anybody does 3 interviews a day for anything, because I'd say 2 at the most. Because I remember, God bless her, Ruth Baumgarten, who was just an absolute darling, and she's a producer on Ghostwatch. And she was the last interview of the day, and we'd been all over the place. It's all written in a diary, but I just couldn't focus. I've got these questions in front of me, and I know that she's going to give me a good answer, but I just had to take it on absolute faith. And she was so on the ball. She knew, again, another one of these interviewees who knew exactly what she wanted to say and how to say it. And to be fair, I remember just sort of snapping out of it. It's so rude to Ruth. And she was just waxing lyrical and this happened and then this happened, and I just couldn't keep up. She was so much, giving us so much more than I expected. And then I remember saying, in terms of like how you feel about Ghostwatch now, is there anything that you would say as kind of closing thoughts? Because I knew that she'd given us at least an hour's worth of footage or something, and all of my checklist had been marked off, and she just gave us this beautiful closing line. And then our cameraman for the day just said, memory card's out, boss, that's it. There was some technical things, I suppose. As I say, I would never do more than 2 interviews in a day if I could help it. I'm just trying to think if anything really, really slowed us down. I don't recall anything like that. We were given some advice as regard the cut. There were a couple of minor changes that we made just before we locked, just in the interest of clarity. The grade was always an issue because we had inconsistent lighting day to day. Some shots were kind of, as they say, cooked, so they were either under or overexposed. Fortunately, that's where Coda came in very recently, because there's this sort of notion of getting the documentary out on Blu-ray, certainly streaming, which is going to happen, which is wonderful. Blu-ray is sort of in the offing. There's 1 or 2 things that have presented themselves that we're looking into, as it always tends to be the case. It's just when you've finished everything, something else crops up, and then you have to try and incorporate that. And again, it's trying to be flexible, but also bearing in mind, if I don't stop this soon, and I genuinely thought that the 30th anniversary was going to be it for making adjustments to the documentary, it more or less will be. I don't think there's anything else that needs to be done to it technically. I'm very, very happy with it now. It's HD and all the rest of it. But I know in my heart that if this isn't it, then it's going to be a documentary 70 years in the making, and it's going to be holographic, and smell-o-vision. It's going to be with another 24 hours of footage. The doc is finished. It's done. It's what we wanted in 2012. It's just brought up to your kind of industry spec, if you like, and it's ready to get out there. We just have to make some decisions as regard the best form that will take. Ironically enough, that's going to have to involve the fan base, because there are some kind of binary options, technical options. Like, well, if you want this, then it's going to have to be that, and if you want that, it's going to have to be this, because you just can't force it on the Blu-ray medium. It's tricky, and it's going to take some explaining, but we'll get there.
Even when I was going back and rewatching Ghostwatch recently and cutting clips out of it for our Halloween special, and even now as an adult, knowing everything that I know about Ghostwatch, I still get chills in certain places of that program, and I think more so from the cats than from anything else. The sound bites that they grab for the cats in this program are insane. And I don't know what it was about those, because you hear cats fighting outside your house at midnight or whatever, and it doesn't bother you that much, the fact that it's keeping you awake. But I don't know.
Speak for yourself, Jason.
Pipes, he's coming.
First thing you think of, you can't. The number of tweets that I've seen of somebody who has pulled up alongside a white van that says, Mr. Pipes Plumbing Services or something like that. You can't. Nobody can say pipes. Nobody can say pipes. Nobody can say glory hole. Nobody can say round and round the garden like a teddy bear. I've recently become a father, and one of the first things that my son was given was a scrunchy, scratchy, it was like a book. It's only about 4 pages. And one of the pages is Round and Round the Garden, or one of the nursery rhymes from Ghostwatch. That's the first thing that I thought of when I opened it. He's also been given a Halloween book. Now, I've tweeted this recently. He was given a Halloween book, which is like a pop. It's like a pop-up book, but it's a slider. So every page is a thick piece of card, and it's you manipulate it, and something pops out like a pumpkin or whatever. There's a page with a flight of stairs and a door under the stairs. It's literally the cupboard door under the stairs. To the left is a cat, and to the right you open the door and a ghost comes out. And I can't help. I had to tweet, have I been working on this thing too long? Am I literally just seeing Ghostwatch everywhere? Or is whoever made this kid's book a Ghostwatch fan and just thought, kids won't get this, they're not allowed to watch it till they're 12, but I'll just put a little ghost in the sheet, and the parents will think it's a laugh. Yeah right. I was like shaking holding this thing with my son, like looking up at me like, oh god, what's he doing? It's embarrassing me at 5 months old. It's just unbelievable. But it does seem to have permeated. People talk about whether or not Ghostwatch is, I think certainly at the very least unconsciously has influenced a great many things. I know for a fact that Oren Peli, who was the kind of the brains behind the Paranormal Activity film, the first one, he was interviewed and asked, I'm not sure if it was influences or DVDs that he thought should have a wider acknowledgement or something to that effect, and he said, yeah, Ghostwatch. So somebody needs to explain to me how a BBC special drama feature that aired once in 1992 can have fans in Japan. How can you cross that? That either says that cultures are so disparate, but Ghostwatch can jump over them, and that there are common threads, or it actually just means that we're actually fairly, we've got more in common than we think, maybe. I mean, it's entirely feasible to watch Ringu or something as a Westerner. That works. But Ghostwatch is such a kind, it's almost kitchen sink, it's so
British.
It's so British. It's so of its time. like the prospect of remaking it or doing it in another territory or whatever. Listen, I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure it is, but would it work? Arguably, I mean, Steve Volk said something that has never left me, which was, what would Ghostwatch have been like if it had been on another channel as opposed to BBC One? And he said, well, that would have been the equivalent of being told a spooky story by your dubious uncle over your trusted auntie. And in that respect, it I just think that all of those dominoes lined up for Ghostwatch. I think if it had shifted slightly out of alignment, it probably wouldn't have been quite as effective. It's just like it's these tiny little incremental um, positionings on all different fronts, just fine tuning it to perfection. I can't think of much that I would change in Ghostwatch, and I don't think Leslie can either. And I wouldn't belie that. I wouldn't. I have asked her fairly recently, is there anything that you would change? Would you go and do a director's cut of Ghostwatch? Would you, like a lot of directors do, they're not happy with Star Trek or Star Wars, you just go back, you constantly and change it, and to the point where it's almost unrecognizable. And she was like, no, it's fine. I'm more than happy with Ghostwatch. Thank you very much. So yeah, I think they got as much out of it as they possibly could, and it was like 50 tuning forks going off at once. But yeah, the fact that it works today and that it works on a big screen, we've got 3 big screenings for Halloween coming up. Friday, at the time of recording this, Friday, Saturday, and then those are in Sheffield, and then there's another one in London, South Bank. And I remember the last time I saw Ghostwatch at South Bank with Parky, Richard Brooke, Gillian, Leslie, Steve, Ruth was there. I really hope I'm not missing anybody out of that. It was a great night. So everybody was there. Pat was there. And I remember the tittering throughout. From the moment it started, people it was a packed house as well. The huge big screen presentation, how it blows up that well on the big screen. You could see detail and all. Beautiful. And the sound was brilliant as well. Feature film sound designer on Ghostwatch, Win Rider, dragged out of retirement, as I understand, from David Lean's Great Expectations. So that's the kind of things he used to work on. And as you say, the cats and what have you is very evocative, very, immersive, which is the theme of these screenings that are going to take place over the next couple of days. But I remember the tittering from the crowd, who were so confident they knew what was going to happen throughout. They got it down to, I've seen this before. Oh, I can't believe you've dragged me along to this. Oh, this is ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. And then I don't, spoilers for anybody listening, but there's a moment in Ghostwatch where one of the characters is caught on camera faking a haunting, a disturbance. And they get absolutely hauled over the coals on live television. They're a young character. They get very upset, very distressed. They start crying. Of course, it's all acting. They start crying. They start screaming for their mum. It just gets really uncomfortable. And I swear that place, you could hear the air conditioner. It went totally not caring. It's this fascinating moment in Ghostwatch, that point in the story where you go, oh God, I've been part of this. I've actually willed this into it happening. It's not the ghost that's the scary thing. It's somebody being torn to shreds on live television for being so desperate that they're willing to do anything to be listened to or heard or believed, that they're even willing to lie about it. And you go, oh, how, turn it off. It's so terrible. You feel so bad for them. And then, of course, it's this wonderful misdirect, and there's things going on in the background, and there you're distracted by your own sense of by your own conscience, maybe, I don't know, watching it. Yeah. Oh man, this is crazy. This is This is the problem with podcasts on Ghostwatch. I just end up talking. Right. So first scene, we got parking. And the second scene, we got, I love effusing about it. I love trying to fathom it. I still can't. Still don't know why it works so well. I don't have any issue with anybody that doesn't dig it. It very rarely happens, but you get the odd detractor. Fine, more for the rest of us. But big screenings of Ghostwatch, can't fathom how they play so well. There was one in Manchester that was like a rock concert. It was just people it's the only presentation, big screen presentation. Bearing in mind, I've seen Jaws in a cinema-like environment where I did see people jump. It's the only time I've ever genuinely, truthfully seen the popcorn silhouetted against the screen, with people just sort of throwing it up in the air and, jolting and screaming when they see pipes. That horrible, I don't know what it is. There must be a word for it. Like they say, is it the Inuits have 100 words for snow or something along those lines. There must be a very efficient, elegant word that describes the sound that somebody makes when they see pipes and they weren't expecting it. I don't know what it is. Maybe I'll put it to the crowd for this Halloween. Maybe we can try and invent a word. But it's a unique, wonderful, in its own horrific way, a response, and certainly not one to be ignored. It's a really fascinating phenomenon, Ghostwatch, and it's even today. I think it remains one of the great discoverable. My wording is terrible, but it's one of the last great discoverable programs where people still on Twitter, they'll see a hashtag Ghostwatch, which invariably happens around Halloween, and then you'll see this sort of thread of somebody saying, "What's Ghostwatch? Is it on right now?" And then people just come running and say, "You've got to get the DVD. Have you not seen this? Go on YouTube, try and find a clip." For that to happen today, in a world where you can literally type in anything, it's the response to Ghostwatch, arguably, that is as important as the program itself. But that response wouldn't have happened without the program. So it's kind of like the snake eating its own tail. But people, the joy that people, it just sort of leaks out of them. They're so happy. They glow, even when they're scared about it. I went to the house. I went into the glory hole. Guess what? Great. I was quaking in my boots, but I couldn't care less. Like, join us for the ride. And another thing I love about the documentary project is very, very occasionally people have reached out to say that they're really quite upset, or I'm really scared. I've just watched it. I'm really scared. The first thing that I say when I respond back is like, you're among friends. Like, you don't have to tell us your life story. Like, we get it. We get that you've watched this program and that you love it. Chances are you and I are going to be very different people at the core, but we understand this. This is a language that we understand, and we're responding to it similarly. So, trust me, it's cool. Like, one day you'll want to watch this again and you'll dig it. Like, I'm confident in that. If it happened to me as a 7-year-old, it'll happen to you. And it's a lovely, supportive community to be a part of. It's an honour. It really is. Team effort.
One team, one dream.
That's it. Exactly.
You're talking about the watching Ghostwatch on a big screen is very appealing to me, and it feels like something that really needs to be experienced, I think.
Absolutely. And Ghostwatch was communal. As disconnected as we were on Halloween night 1992, the 11.07 million people were watching it at the same time. And there wouldn't have been much in terms, because it's not digital or anything. You can't press pause. There's no program clash on your electronic program guide or anything like that. You have to tune in to BBC One on the night and watch it as it goes out. And I was probably a bit too young. I don't recall there being much in the way of conversation in the playground the next day, but I know that the radio phone-in shows were kind of besieged on the night. There was a lot of stuff in the newspapers, obviously, but not much in terms of like a forum. That's what I think Stephen Freestone engendered in the early 2000s by making his website. It just gave people somewhere to go, and I was terribly sad when the website went offline for very good reasons that I'll let Stephen go into. But I was more than happy to pick up that baton, and I am in all important respects, and it's probably the ego talking to a large extent, but I do consider myself a kind of caretaker of it, a caretaker of the reception to it. Like, I've no real interest in chasing likes, or I'm not going to be like, the one thing I would never do is just post the copious number of articles that very enthusiastic writers put up where every other word is like controversy, or you know what I mean, like the negative rumor mill and everything. Like, I don't look, if you want to talk about it, great, power to you. I'm sure what you're going to contribute, it will form a larger picture. But my bag has always been a kind of support group, if you like. Anybody that considers it scary, or they don't get it, or anything like that, look, you ask a question, you're going to get a good answer. In fact, you probably get like 10 good answers, and then you can make your own mind up. But just know in your heart that you're not the only person out there. You're not. This isn't some like tiny little cult thing or whatever. It's a moment that we all lived, that's worth preserving, and I think it's exponentially useful to look back at Ghostwatch when you consider what the kind of prophetic notions of, it seemed absurd in '92 that you would have. It was quite quick paced as well for OB or Light Entertainment. Again, going back to like Noel's House Party and that kind of stuff, like they were working on a different sort of rhythm, but the technology aspects of it, like a light pen, like the stuff that those thermal cameras in Ghostwatch that they were using in the Gulf War. I mean, I know thermal cameras are expensive today, but you can get one that plugs into your iPhone for like 200 quid. In those days, it was almost parodic to suggest that a mainstream BBC One live broadcast would employ that level of technology. I love anything that catches up with itself in terms of the reaction. Like in back in the day, almost absurd, albeit they pulled it off. I mean, you can have a live satellite link up, you can have a light pen, you can have a thermal camera, but it would be uncommon for that to be on a BBC program. But guess what? You can do it now. So what's the message there? Is the message that what is absurd in the past may become commonplace in the future? In that regard, I can't see how Ghostwatch can be considered anything but satirical, but it very much isn't. I know it certainly wasn't considered that, but maybe retrospectively it can be considered somewhat of a satire.
I just got a couple more questions for you, and the first one is the upcoming Ghostwatch Blu-ray release for its 30th anniversary was a nice surprise. Was you expecting that at all, or
Yeah, I was aware of it. I'm sure the kind of a history will come out as regard that. There was a consideration to include the documentary in that release.
No, I was going to ask you that. Yeah.
Yeah, there was. It didn't. I mean, obviously, it didn't happen. I think it's overdue, a Blu-ray release. Certainly, a kind of a release in nice packaging and with new extras and all the rest of it. I think Behind the Curtains is at the moment it's very much a kind of standalone thing compared to that. And we'll see what happens. I've pre-ordered a copy of the 101 release, and I'm excited to see how it's been put together. But it was, I think, the thing with Behind the Curtains was that it was conceived so long ago, and the plan was always to do a kind of 2-disc edition anyway. So, bearing in mind that the documentary is its own standalone thing, I think it possibly works better in that regard. But and also there are lots of technical aspects to such a release that are, for me, daunting. You know what I mean? And 101 are a company who have been doing this sort of thing for a long time, so their take on it will be hitting shelves very, very shortly. And it's telling, like if you can find a HMV or whatever, that there is a 101 film shelf. You know what I mean? So that it's their rodeo. They know what they're doing. But yeah, Behind the Curtains at present will be standalone.
And speaking of that, it's not currently available to buy or stream your documentary right now, but is that likely to change anytime soon?
Yeah, streaming, certainly. BFI have picked it up for Halloween. They've got a kind of spooky season on at the moment, and I think it will probably be folded into that. BFI, they've been so supportive of Ghostwatch and the documentary right from the beginning. I'm not sure if I've already said this, but their 2002 DVD was tremendous, really well conceived. And then for the documentary, they picked up some DVD copies that were available in the South Bank bookshop, which was just phenomenal. It was such a joy to see my film on its own little shelf. And I seem to recall Steve Bolt going in there, apropos of nothing, certainly not connected to the documentary, and sort of in a meta sense, as they say these days, looking at watching staff watching him on the big screen TV as they played a copy of the documentary, only to turn around and go, "Oh, we really love Ghostwatch. We've been watching this documentary on a loop." So, and Sight and Sound did a great review for the documentary. It was really sweet and succinct and generous. And they also added the documentary to the Mediatek. So for all the people who've been asking, why aren't there any more DVDs? Well, first of all, we sold out of DVDs. I mean, that's just it. We physically sold out of them. But if you have a library in your nearby area that has access to the BFI Mediatek, then you should be able to find a copy of the documentary. Certainly probably the DVD export, as we would say. That version is still available on Mediatek. But yeah, BFI player, not to be confused with BBC iPlayer, BFI player will be bringing the documentary back on the 27th of October. And that is the bells and whistles, brand new version. Physical media, I'm very keen to see that happen. However, there are things that need to be finalised as regard that. Technically, things in terms of budget, you only really get one shot at doing it. Everything is actually more or less lined up, but something, I'm not going to say just yet, something presented itself to us recently that I certainly wasn't expecting, and it's terribly exciting, and I am in the process of looking into that. And that's probably the direction that we're going to go. We have to get all of our pipes in a row, if you will. But yeah, it shouldn't be too long before an announcement is made one way or the other as regard that. But yeah, huge thanks to the BFI, who are just tremendous, brilliant. I've never had a bad experience with BFI. They're absolutely lovely, and they adore film. They champion film. They champion little indie nobodies like me whose enthusiasm comes across. And yeah, I'm eternally grateful for their support. They've been marvellous.
The BFI really are the champions of British film, and don't really know what we'd do without them, really. So here's to the BFI.
Here's to the BFI. Their archival range is just unbelievable. They really their conservation, their archive, it's so important. You wouldn't. It's difficult to appreciate just how hard they work. In the grand scheme of things. I could praise them forever.
Thank you, Rich. I mean, I think I could spend all night just talking to you about Ghostwatch and films, but unfortunately time is always against us. But thank you. Yeah, it's been a fascinating chat.
Yeah, we're always on the lookout. Like if you have a copy that you recorded on the night, if you have the original continuity that followed the program, that's still to be discovered in full. But anything, your stories, your creations. Have you made a T-shirt? Have you made a Mr. Pipes action figure? They often come up in one form or another. Yeah, it'd be a pleasure to hear from you and to invite you into the community, the family of fellow pipes phobes. That was my favourite one. Foxillians was another one. Yeah. It's a good community when they can't quite decide on their name.
Sure.
It's like Trekkies, Trekkers, but it's always a pleasure to hear from people. Thank you so much for having me. Happy Halloween. Now, where's my 50 quid?
Pipes might have that. I'll send him round.
Oh God, no! It's this is gratis, obviously.
Well, I hope you enjoyed hearing Rich's thoughts and experiences on Ghostwatch as much as it did me. Please go and follow Rich on Twitter at Ghostwatch, and you can find his website at ghostwatchbtc.com. Coming Friday is our main Halloween episode, where we are joined by Chris Scullion as we discuss our Ghostwatch memories and the programme itself. Well, that's your lot for this one. Thank you as always to everyone for joining us. And if you have enjoyed the pod and would like to support us, then we have a coffee page where you can give us a one-off tip, or if you're feeling kinder, a monthly tip starting from £1. A massive thank you to all who have done so. You're all legends. And if that is not right for you right now, you can also support us by giving us a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. You can find the links in the show description or on our website. Speaking of the website, you can find links to our coffee page, our entire back catalogue of episodes and written articles. You can find the website at thewolfiepod.com. Next time, as mentioned, we have our Halloween special coming this Friday. My name has been Jason, and please keep those eyes peeled for any strange figures in the corner of your room. It just might be Pipes. Come in to say hello.
Hey, Janelle. What's wrong with Wolfie? I can hear him barking.